cool thing about those sorts of assets that you build and those sorts of businesses that, you said it was slow at first, but part of it is you're building the library. So the value proposition just isn't there in the early days usually, but over, 5 years of adding videos and training and this, all the stuff, now all of a sudden this thing is a compelling thing that you can offer. What's it like, I guess, marketing and selling it now? Is it easier now? Does it sort of sell itself? Is it still the sort of thing you got to convince these people they need it?
Yeah, there's still some convincing. Nobody likes HR training, so convincing people that they really need it first and that yours is a good value. And again, marketing to the tip is one way we do it. Marketing, I speak at conferences and workshops and stuff a lot.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where we get to interview founding attorneys that are doing cool and interesting and different things in the law. And today's guest is Theresa Sidebotham. She's an attorney based in Colorado, and she's got an interesting niche practice that, I got to be honest, I really didn't even know was a practice. And so when we met, a couple months ago, I thought it was very interesting. So I said, Theresa, you got to come on and talk about this. So Theresa, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your firm, your practice, and anything else you think we should know before we dive in.
Well, thanks for bringing me on, Jonathan. You said my name, Theresa Sidebotham. The law firm is Telios Law. And our practice areas, we work with a lot of ministries and nonprofits. We work with faith-based business owners, and we work also, with secular nonprofits and regular businesses. But our vision for law is around creating a culture of life and healing. So, of course, it helps if our clients are interested in that to some degree. We tend to handle people problems. So everything from child safeguarding, workplace misconduct, discrimination, harassment, and that's along a spectrum of training and prevention, talking through issues like maybe employee termination, or doing a full-blown workplace investigation. We do a lot of those. So it's a very interesting practice. It's a bit dark sometimes, unless you're thinking about it redemptively, which we try to do.
Yeah, so it sounds like there are elements of, I guess, traditional employment type law, sort of, but you come at it's sort of a different angle, it sounds like.
Right. Well, yes, a lot of it is employment law, and of course we want to meet all the legal standards and compliance and give the best legal advice. But I would say we're adding a holistic approach of thinking about culture and spiritual and emotional factors and, just generally, how is our advice going to work well for the business or ministry? And financial factors too, for that matter.
Yeah. So the name. Tell me about the name of the firm. So what does it mean? How did you pick it? People who listen to this have heard me say it before. I love good trade name type names for law firms as opposed to, Smith, Smith, and Smith. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, this will make you laugh. I've been married for 42 years to my husband, Bruce Sidebotham. And it was actually his inspiration, both starting the law firm and picking the name. So he said, you really need to start a law firm. There's ministries all over this country and internationally that need your help. And he said, you don't want to call it Sidebotham. It's an awful name for a law firm. Well, he's got a point there, right? So he said, call it Telios. So Telios is a Greek word out of the New Testament. And if you see the straight translation might be perfect, when Jesus is talking about be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect, but it doesn't mean perfect like perfectionist or never make a mistake. It means whole or complete or mature. So it's getting back to this idea of how do we do legal work, help clients in a way that will make their lives whole, that will make their organizations and cultures more whole. What's mature, what's looking at things in a complete way from all the angles. So it helps us stay focused on what our goal is, and it avoids that very odd last name, Sidebotham.
Well, let's dive in a little bit into your practice. Like I said, it's, from my perspective, I just really didn't even imagine. I mean, it makes sense now that I know about it, but before I just hadn't even thought about it. And so, obviously you represent some, regular businesses, but a lot of churches and religious organizations. So what kind of stuff do you do for them?
So one whole huge area is child safeguarding. If you're talking about a church, youth camp, schools, whatever, anywhere you've got kids involved. So first you want to figure out how to keep them safe. And then you also want to figure out if there is some kind of an allegation, how are you going to respond? How are you going to keep predators out? How are you going to get predators out? So there's this whole, and sometimes there's not an adult predator. Often, children with children are involved in some stuff. So that's one whole area that's really complicated. But then if you think in the employment space, and any business owner, in these days, ever since #MeToo, has to think about, okay, well, what about sexual harassment? What about other forms of discrimination? So we're talking here about what you might call abuse in the workplace, whether that's power abuse, emotional abuse, sexual harassment. And decent business owners don't want that in their workplace. Ministries even less, because it goes against the faith values. But how do you keep that out? What do you do to train and prevent? How do you respond? How do you deal with toxic people? And these are complicated emotional problems, but they're complicated legal problems. There's huge legal liability. They're complicated financial problems because the PR alone can do enormous damage to a ministry or business in this space. So we're not looking at it as just how to help the victim or just how to prevent it or just how to deal with the financial or legal ramifications, but it's a both and. What's the holistic approach? Because we think it helps the business or the ministry to make it a better place to be, and we're caring for the people, and we're making it a place where other people would like to come. So that's a win-win approach to it.
I imagine it could be very complicated, sort of figuring out who you represent. So you've got, perhaps, I'm just going to throw a hypothetical out there. Let's say you have a lead minister that maybe is accused of something, and then you've got the governing structure, then you have like a victim, and then you've got the congregation or whatever. How do you approach, how do you figure out, you just go where it goes, or, take me through the process? That just seems really complicated to me. How do you maneuver through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know legal ethics is one of your specialties. I don't often get that question that exact way. And you're right, it is complicated, and you could make a real mess up if you didn't navigate that right. So for me, most of the time, 99% of the time, the organization's going to be my client. If it's a really senior leader, like CEO level, it may be the board itself directly that I'm working with. If it's, less so, it may be senior leaders that I'm working with. So that's who the client is. I'm pretty insistent that any individual who's accused has got to be recused out of any decision making, reporting, that kind of thing. And if they're not willing to do that, then they're not working with me on it. One of the goals of the organization, as I mentioned, is caring for people. So as I'm talking to the client, let's just say it's a ministry, it would be similar with a business, but a slightly different conversation. So, as a Christian ministry, God is calling you to care well for people, to show love, to show the character of Christ. So, in addition to thinking about legal liability, compliance, good workplace practices, we're going to be thinking about that, which means if there's a victim, if healing is needed, the work that we're doing will go to that end. It's the idea in the end is reconciliation, restoration, not necessarily putting somebody back in the same position, but healing, maybe even organizational apologies. So they know from the outset, we want to find out the truth and we want to do the right thing with the truth. So that's, if you will, the scope. If I'm doing an investigation, it's to do a neutral, independent investigation to bring them the truth. If I'm acting as counsel, advising on the matter, I'll help them walk through steps to find out the truth and respond well. So if they wanted to be the kind of organization that's just like figure out some way to cover this up and make this go away, I wouldn't be that attorney. But I think really most attorneys, that's not their desire either. Most attorneys would like, let's get things out, figure it out, help it go well. The person who's bringing allegations and the person who's accused are often suffering quite a bit of emotional trauma through this. So a lot of times I'll say, give them a pastoral support person that helps them walk through this, but don't let that person be a decision maker, be involved in evaluating the legal work that we're doing. So we try to break up, okay, who needs support, who needs someone advocating for them, who's that going to be so that it doesn't conflict with my representation. In some cases, I never talk to the people who may be victims. If I'm doing an investigation, I'll often be talking to them, but it's always clear I'm not your legal counsel. We may connect them with other resources that will help them walk through that. The organization might do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so, I haven't personally been involved in these, but I read about them in the paper. So you've got, some allegation of, abuse, and it may result in an actual lawsuit against maybe the organization, maybe the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator. Are you involved in those at all? Or is that there's some sort of insurance counsel that's appointed that may defend that? What's your relationship to those type of actions?
Yeah, I'm very rarely involved in those. Most of my clients, whether it's ministry or business, are in the stage of, workplace allegation and response and not litigation. It's pre-litigation, and what you hope is if you do it well, you never go to litigation, which is true in 90% of the cases. Now, every once in a while, litigation might get filed. And of course, if I've been doing an investigation, I'm ethically barred from being defense counsel anyway. But defense counsel in litigation isn't a role that I'm really looking for because there's insurance defense. They're usually doing it. There's so many competent attorneys. You know a bunch of them. I know a bunch of them who are great at that work. And so I prefer, I think my highest and best use is this prevention and response work where, I've got some skills and approaches that are maybe a little bit more unique.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you get into this area? Again, it's like I've been around for, I don't know, 20 plus years at this point, until I lose count. But I've never met an attorney that's in this space till I met you. So how did you find it?
It was an interesting journey. So, I may have mentioned to you when we talked before, I was a missionary kid, grew up in Indonesia. My husband wound up, we spent some time over there as a family. He was an Army Reserve chaplain. So I grew up in this ministry space. And, me as a business owner is kind of a new evolution in our family and a little bit of a different thing. Then I clerked for a while. Well, so I should say, I'm one of these second career attorneys, right? We have 4 kids. I was raising them, doing some homeschooling. They get up around middle school, early high school age. So I go back to law school, graduate 20 years ago. Clerked for a while at the Court of Appeals. Then I wound up with a largish outfit that had a religious institutions practice and was doing some of the Catholic sex abuse defense work. So they actually were doing, the litigation defense and doing a good job of it. But getting into that world, it started to connect some of the things I'd seen as a child, and I'm like, the evangelical organizations have these same problems. They're sort of over there feeling a bit superior, and not so. Anybody who's been working with kids for a long time has those problems. So when I ended up leaving that firm, starting Telios Law, I would say the child safeguarding was kind of the path in. And then you realize, well, but if you've got an atmosphere that allows problems with keeping kids safe, there's employee problems too, right? And so this concept of abuse and harm really spreads out through the organization and gradually got more and more into what we'd probably think of as the employment law side of it. So it just evolved.
It's funny how that happens.
Yeah.
I look back at my practice and, it's changed a lot, but I can sort of pinpoint the seeds and the beginnings of it. So I want to talk about forming your own firm. But before we do that, you mentioned sort of growing up overseas, Indonesia and all that. And, I was looking at your bio and you've lived a lot of places, done a lot of cool stuff. And I want to sort of, dive into that a little bit. So you have 4 sons, but I think 3 of them were born on different continents, or they were born on 3 different continents. That's pretty cool. So maybe take me through, sort of where were you? What were you doing? You said this is your sort of second career, but what was up before?
So I'd mentioned I was a missionary kid, came back to the States, went to college, met my husband there. And so missionary kids, there's a whole group of people called third culture kids. They can be missionary kids, embassy kids, oil kids, military kids who've lived overseas. It's really anybody who's been taken by their parents to another country that's not their country and had to live there for a while. And the upshot generally is you're comfortable with a lot of cultures and you're not really completely belonging to any one culture. To some extent, there's some real comparisons with the immigrant experience, even minority experiences within this country, that there's, shifting cultures. So met my husband, who was a Navy brat and had, some of the same third culture background. We got married. Oh gosh, we were so young. I was 20, he was 22. He was a lieutenant in the Army, so we spent 3 years in Panama. That was back in, kind of the Cold War days, the time of the Contras and so forth. So he was off doing engineer stuff all the time. We did spend enough time together to get pregnant and have our first son there. So he was born in Panama. Then he got out. We wanted to go back and do some Christian work, some missions work in Indonesia. So he went back to grad school. He was still in the Army. Yeah, that's right. Second son was born in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Then we got out. And the third son was born in California. We were sort of on our way en route to Indonesia at that point. We were really poor at the time. I remember we had a special where if you could get in and out of the hospital in under 24 hours, it was $1,000 to have a baby. This is a while ago, right? And then we head over and live in Padang, West Sumatra for about 7 years. And the youngest was actually born in a hospital there. He's the youngest of 4 boys. And when he'd get fed up with the family, he'd try to tell us, well, no, I was adopted, really. And we'd be like, Joe, you were the only white baby within 1,000 miles. There's no way they mixed you up. Or he'd say, I got mixed up in the hospital. And there's no way they mixed you up in the hospital. There were no other white babies to mix you up with. So you're stuck with his family. So he actually has an Indonesian birth certificate, which he got. So he had his American passport. That's right, they gave him an Indonesian birth certificate. So I showed up at the American embassy and said, I've got this baby. He's my baby, but I can't prove it. And he doesn't have a passport, and we wouldn't be able to get out if we had to. Well, who knew? It turns out they have a special emergency provision to issue U.S. birth certificates and passports to these foreign-born babies.
Wow. So do you or did you know other languages growing up, and do your kids?
So only the youngest was any good at languages, and he did for a while. And he doesn't really now because we came back to the States when he was 5. I grew up speaking Indonesian. I learned Minangkabau while we were over there the second time. I can still speak some Indonesian, but not Minangkabau. Was pretty good at French in high school and college. I can read it a little bit now, but can't really talk it anymore. Studied Greek for a couple years in college, done some Spanish, but I'm not one of these people who's like fluent in multiple languages. It's bits and pieces.
So now all your sons are are they staying in the U.S. or are they jet setting off to other countries now?
Well, they sort of stay in the US. They live here in Colorado, but the oldest is a founding partner of a software company and they sell a lot overseas. So he's always racing off to Europe or India or places like that. And then the third son is also military reserve. So he spent a year in Kuwait and sometimes goes overseas. But yeah, but that's just kind of normal travel, right? That's not
Yeah.
living over there.
Well, the other thing I saw, there's some story about an active volcano, and I wanted to hear that because I want to hear the backstory on this thing.
Oh my gosh. So we go way back. So we have four little boys. The youngest is a toddler. We're living in Pada and we have some young visitors like college students come over and my husband says, "Well, let's climb Mount Merapi, which is the most important mountain in the province and also is an active volcano. But it doesn't usually do much. It maybe belches a little bit, but doesn't usually do much. And it's all covered with jungle and so forth. And I'm like, well, I'm staying with the kids because they don't need both parents to go off and get killed on some wild adventure. And I said, be careful up there. There's tigers in the Sumatran rainforest. He's like, oh, there's no tigers up there. Well, actually, there was a tiger up there that night on the other side of the mountain, but they didn't meet the tiger. They climb all night. They get to the top of the mountain. It's sunrise. They spend a little time up there just kind of being together, praying a bit. And then just as they're getting ready to head back down, the volcano erupts and really erupts for like the first time in 20 or 30 years. So they hear this right at the top. I mean, they're like 100 yards from the whole top. And they hear this boom in the ground and they start running, right? And he said rocks the size of coffee tables going like up hundreds of feet into the air and everything coming back down.
Oh, man.
So it was really almost miraculous that they just didn't all four get killed. They took some shelter behind a rock. They did all four get burns. These were third-degree burns, and the rock would hit and burn through layers of clothes and give you a third-degree burn just like that.
Oh my gosh.
A couple of them had broken limbs, but not like snapped. Like I think one fractured, maybe a fractured wrist, some fractured ribs. I can't remember exactly. So there's no EMS there, right? So they spend the next 6 or 8 hours hiking down off the mountain despite their state of, being injured. And so first I hear is they call from the town where they are, and my husband doesn't even tell me much. He's like, well, there's been a bit of an accident, so we're driving home, and can you meet us at the hospital? So I meet him at the hospital, and those war movies where everybody's like all black with smoke and stuff and thing tied around their head? Yeah, it was that. So they get off and they look like they've been, well, of course they have. They've been through a huge fire. They're just coated with this black stuff. And 2 of them stayed overnight at the hospital. My husband and the other one went home because they weren't quite as seriously injured. And then the next morning, I flew with 2 of them to Jakarta and met somebody else who flew them out to Singapore to get medical care. They had, burn grafts and the whole thing. I mean, it was a pretty big deal. My husband has scars to this day, and what he will tell you, he says, third-degree burns kill the nerves, so they don't actually hurt for a couple of weeks, and then they start to heal, and then it kicks in and starts to hurt. So, yeah, he had, burns like this big on his back. And
Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah.
tell me that was the last time he hiked up that mountain.
That was the last time he hiked up that mountain. And for guys, I think there's a point in life where they realize for the first time that they're not invincible and immortal and you can actually die. He's still very brave and adventurous. But after that, if I said things like, don't swim in those shark infested waters, he'd be like, oh, all right.
Oh man, that is crazy story. Yeah, so I wanted to hear about
crazy.
that, but so let's switch back to the law firms. So what leading up to you starting your own firm? I mean, you were at a firm. What gave you the push to go do it? Why not just stay at the firm?
Yeah, so it was a great firm and a great apprenticeship, but it ended up not being a good fit. There's probably still some glass ceiling issues for women in the law, and you know how the bigger firms are. If there's one partner who doesn't just love you, there's not really much of a future for you. I think the way my husband put it is, he's like, Theresa, you'll do great at a firm for 6 months or a year, and then you'll start having ideas again. so I, it could have gone somewhere else, but there was that problem that I do tend to think of ideas, and people don't always want their lowly associates thinking of ideas. So my husband's point was, go start your own firm, and then you can have all the ideas you want. And I think he was probably right.
So what was it like the early days?
So you got to remember my background, right? I've never even seen QuickBooks. I mean, I know how to balance a checkbook with the, writing the stuff in, and then my husband complaining because my numbers weren't all lined up nicely. So I had to learn everything. So I just started taking in as much as I could about how do you run a business generally, how do you run a law firm, listening to CLEs, podcasts, whatever was out there. We were checking out books and reading them. In the beginning, I mean, it was really insane. We had hardly any money. We'd been putting our kids through college at expensive private Christian colleges, so all the money had gone into their future, not our future. And we just said, okay, God, if this is something that you want us to do, we need help. There's no money. There's one kid left in college. We've never done this before. So the VA changed the rules on the GI Bill that year, so my husband was able to sign his GI Bill to get the last kid through his last year of college. And, a little bit of work came in here, a little bit of work came in there. My husband's in ministry, so he's not making hardly anything, right? But it worked. And, through so much of our lives, God has just provided what we needed. So we kind of watched that play out. I'm working out of my house, so I've got my little desk, my little laptop, and it started to grow. You and I are both involved with Atticus, and I used to listen to their stuff and read their stuff, and then about 5 or 6 years ago started working with them. But I always really wanted to figure out, okay, how do you do the business of law well? I had gotten a pretty good attorney training at, the appellate court and the firm, but the business side.
Well, it's a challenge, but I enjoy it. How have you liked it?
I do like it. And I like running the business. People say, oh, managing people, it's difficult. And yeah, it is. And yeah, I've made some mistakes, but it's also a great way to bless people. And it's interesting. And, I actually even kind of enjoy my sessions with QuickBooks.
Well, I won't go that far from me, but I very quickly, after, 3 months, I was like, yeah, I'm outsourcing this part. I'm not doing that anymore. It's just, but real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So when you started it, did you have clients? Were you able to bring clients with you, or did you start from scratch?
It was pretty much from scratch. I mean, there were 1 or 2 clients that did eventually come over and give some work, but I didn't have an active book of business because I was still an associate. So it was, it was pretty much a wish and a prayer. And
Yeah. So did you know when you started it, did you know that your practice was going to be sort of what it is now? Did you have an idea, a vision what it was going to be? So then you knew at least what types of clients you wanted and maybe where to go fish for those clients, or did it just sort of organically happen?
well, for the ministry clients, because I had been working with them at the firm, I knew they were the ones that I was best equipped to help with my background and the work I had been doing. So, yeah, I went to conferences that were focused around those issues, there's a big missions conference, and I do represent a lot of the missions organizations. There's Child Safety Protection Network. So, starting with some of those problems that I had a really good background, because even then I'd already been doing some speaking and writing on some of those topics. So that formed the core, and then it grew from there.
Yeah, because, most lawyers, they do some what I'll just call sort of traditional practice area, family law, civil litigation, personal injury, criminal, where there's lots of clients everywhere. They're just everywhere. And then you can meet other lawyers and get referrals. So it just is a little bit easier, where it seems like your practice area, it's hyper niche, and meeting with other lawyers is not really going to get you clients in your practice area, I wouldn't think. Maybe every now and then, but for the most part, you got to go fish where the clients are. So was that the conference route or just, I don't know, you tell me.
The conference route for sure, and I would offer to do presentations, that kind of thing. Pretty early into it, we started doing a monthly Telios tip. We've got one now for ministries and one for businesses. And, as we got people on the mailing list, we'd send this monthly update, legal updates, HR stuff, child safety, whatever. And we've done that for a number of years, and that's helped us keep in touch with people. The one attorney referral network, so we're involved with Christian Legal Society. And I will say there's been some referrals there from the attorney side, either attorneys that are also working in this ministry nonprofit sector who need help with investigations or whatever, or just, most of these attorneys are involved with a ministry or two, and they might send them our way. There's actually a lot of ministries out there, churches and all kinds of ministries. If you looked in any average sized city, there's probably hundreds even. The trick with ministries is convincing them that they need legal counsel. Most of them consider that to be highly optional. I've talked to organizations that are 50 million a year revenue that don't have in-house counsel, and they think 5 hours a year of legal work is really about a sweet spot. And
That's crazy.
it's crazy. Well, and it's not good for them, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that isn't done right, and they're getting themselves in trouble. They're underinsured. So they need us, but convincing them that they need us is sometimes a problem.
So part of your job is to educate them why they need you. So this Telios tip, is that a physical mailer or like an email or both?
Yeah, that's an email one. I've heard the physical ones are good. I haven't really gotten in that direction. But we do that, and then we have a whole training affiliate that's called Telios Studios, or TeliosTeaches.com is actually the website. And that's HR training and child safeguarding training. There's two versions. There's a specifically biblically based version, and then there's more of a values based version of it. And that's to help ministries and businesses think through some of these issues with how do you handle complaints and responses, harassment, but more from the perspective that we want to do this well because humans have value. From the Christian perspective, they're made in the image of God, but even from a secular perspective, we want to value humans for who they are and really embrace being part of the same family in Christ, or being part of the brotherhood of man if you're being secular. Next would be the brotherhood and the sisterhood, right? But that sense of humans as humans. So not that our interests are competing, but that we treat each other with honor and dignity. And that's the perspective that the training takes, along with the legal compliance. So I think the training in itself is also a bit of a marketing piece. I don't know if the law firm's marketing for the training or vice versa, but it's all in there together.
So yeah, let's talk about the training. I wanted to talk about that. So it's a separate business outside the law firm, and is it in person? Is it videos? Is it both?
We occasionally do in-person trainings, but that would be more for organizations that can pay your rates to prepare and come and deliver it. And, that's pricey. So mostly it's a learning management system. And because it's training and not legal services per se, ethically it's split off from the law firm. And we attorneys always like to divide the liability by having different LLCs. So,
Well, it's smart. If you hadn't done it, I would have recommended you do.
Yeah. So that's the training LMS. I do some of the teaching. Actually, one of our sons, David's the creative director. He's doing some of the teaching. So the teaching is informed by, what we're doing on the law firm side, obviously, but it's not legal services per se.
And, I talk to lawyers all the time about these sorts of things. And, I'm a big proponent of it. If you can figure out sort of the adjacent service that's non-legal, perhaps that you can sort of build and sell and all these things, go for it. It makes a lot of sense. How far along into sort of the life of your law firm did you spin off, or did you create the training? When did you realize, hey, that we need to do this?
We started dabbling in it about 5 years ago, and it's grown very slowly. Businesses it's sort of like software as a service, although it's not exactly software, but this type of business in this model tends to grow really slowly unless you have venture capital and, just huge cash infusion so you can hire people. So I wish it had grown a little faster, but I also understand that it's pretty normal in the cycle. But it's robust now. We've got a lot of great training in the suite, and the word's starting to get out. So, but the first idea was probably 5 or 6 years ago.
And what's the pricing model? Is it subscription? Is it a la carte per video? Is it, they buy like a course, all the above?
Yeah, we tried a la carte, and that was just an administrative nightmare. So now it's an organizational subscription. So, let's imagine that you had a law firm with 10 employees. So that would probably be on the lowest level of the subscription. And it would be a band. So it's not each employee is X amount. It's you're in the 1 to 25 band, you're in the 25 to 100 band, you're in the 1,000 plus employee band. And it's priced by the band, and you're not nickel and diming people, and you're not changing it unless there's some kind of significant growth or shrinkage. And then it's an annual subscription. So the idea is it just rolls over every year. And there's enough in there that you could say, well, this year we're all going to do the sexual harassment training, and next year we're going to do the racial discrimination, and I'm going to have my managers do, complaints and investigation response. So that's how the client's got a lot of freedom to select who's going to take what when.
The cool thing about those sorts of assets that you build and those sorts of businesses that, you said it was slow at first, but part of it is you're building the library. So the value proposition just isn't there in the early days usually, but over,
Right.
5 years of adding videos and training and this, all the stuff, now all of a sudden this thing is a compelling thing that you can offer. What's it like, I guess, marketing and selling it now? Is it easier now? Does it sort of sell itself? Is it still the sort of thing you got to convince these people they need it?
Yeah, there's still some convincing. Nobody likes HR training. So convincing people that they really need it first and that yours is a good value. And again, marketing through the tip is one way we do it. Marketing, I speak at conferences and workshops and stuff a lot. And so putting it out there, we'll probably start, we're just on the edge of starting to use Google Ads, but we haven't fully pulled that trigger. We're actually doing some website work, and in the meantime, we're actually trying some work with the company that Atticus mentioned in their AI training, the Rival Flow AI people. So we're updating and upgrading website pages now before we look at doing the Google Ads. And then one thing we're doing, so I mentioned my son, David, he's very creative and funny. I don't know that attorneys are allowed to be all that funny and snarky. But he's not an attorney. He's a millennial with a wacky sense of humor. So he does a vlog series called Stupid Things People Do and What We Can Learn from Them. And he'll pick some case or even a topic, like who knew insurance could be funny? And he'll riff on it with these wild visuals. Somehow he's trained AI to do art that looks like his work. I don't know how he did that. But those are funny and lighthearted, and we put those in the tip. So the idea is if you take the training, sure, you get some of me giving, the standard lecture, but then we break it up with graphics and visuals and quizzes and David being extremely amusing in the Stupid Things vlog. So, yeah, that's building the library.
That's cool. So as between the law firm and the training, looking down the road, maybe now and looking down the road, what do you think is probably going to grow faster? Is there one that you're focusing on over the other, or are they really sort of symbiotic?
Well, they're symbiotic. Right now, the law firm's still supporting the training as we're building it. But if you think about scale, the training could scale. The training could really scale in a big way, in a way that it's very hard for the law firm to do. So if I sell $10,000 worth of legal services, somebody's got to put in 10,000 hours of billable work, whether it's me or another attorney. That's we can leverage, but we can only leverage to the extent that we can get good people who are still doing billable work. But I could sell $10,000 of, the Telios teaches training material, and the additional overhead would be quite minimal because it's all there and it's all software. So maybe just a little bit of customer support, but we're talking minutes or hours. We're not talking major amounts of work. So the rational business approach would be, let's see if we can get that to scale.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard of others that have done it. I mean, there are examples out there, and I think that's really cool. And I don't know if there's much competition in your space for that. So maybe you have a head start over others that, So shifting back to the legal work, there was another thing that when we spoke before, you had mentioned to me something about a client assessment that I don't know if it's a self-assessment or if it's something you guys do. How does that sort of fit into, and maybe it's the sort of the educating process of why they probably need you. I'm curious how you develop that and what role it plays in your business development or maybe just your service delivery.
Yeah, so a bit of both. We were thinking about this problem that many of our clients have no idea where their weak spots are. And so we started brainstorming and we came up with about, I think on the business side, it's a dozen. And on the ministry side, there's a couple more where there's organizational areas you should be thinking about. Everything from your employee handbook to cybersecurity to how to terminate somebody to whatever. I can't even remember all of them. So we developed a self-audit survey for each one of those where you go through all these different areas. Do you do this? Do you do that? And then David took all that and created an automated survey where depending on what your responses are, it also spits out recommendations. So, you did great except for these 3 things. Or, Jonathan, nothing in your employee handbook works. You need to completely. I had one client reach out and say, well, I took this and there's 6 pages of recommendations, and I think we need to hire you to do our employee handbook. I'm like, yeah.
It
So
worked.
there's this whole,
It worked.
yeah, it works. So there's this whole suite, and we have what we call basic, which is like a free subscription. You can go in and get 3 of them. Actually, I'd be glad to send you a link to put in your show notes if you'd like that.
Sure.
And then there's an in between where I think you get half a dozen of them for $500. You can get all 12 of them for $1,000. So it's both being used as a bit of a marketing tool that, one of them will go out with a Telios tip, or somebody who's serious about really going through their business or their ministry can, buy the whole suite and figure out, not all of it. I mean, not 100% of it's even in our practice area, but we know where to send. Like if you wind up with a bunch of finance and tax issues, we know people to send you to. But we want organizations at least to be able to go through it and think about it. And if we were to come in and do a full audit, I mean, that would be a pretty expensive legal project. So this is a little bit of a soft, do some of the work yourself. And you and I have talked a little bit about the legal subscription idea. If you get our legal subscription, access to these self-assessment audits is part of that, along with some of our templates.
Yes, let's talk about the subscription, the legal subscription offering. Have you launched that, and how's it been? My sense is from others that I've talked to, it's an iterative process. So I'm just curious what you've learned and what you're learning.
I agree, it's iterative. We did send out an initial email about it to people that we already had contact with, in Colorado and Texas, because I'm licensed there too. And I think there's been a little bit of interest in it. No one's exactly rushed to sign up and say, I think they've got to think about it for a while. And I think people will want to sign up if they're looking down the tunnel and saying, well, we've got a lot of legal projects this year, this might be a good time. But I've started talking to clients about it on intake and saying, you can either retain us to go through your employee handbook or whatever it is that you want us to do, or you could think about the subscription model, which would include your training, would include all these templates, would have a discounted rate. And I've had some, oh yeah, please send us that information type of response. But I think it's going to take a while to build that up to where, legal services are tough that way, because it's not like buying ice cream where you're like, yeah, I would definitely eat ice cream every week. Well, I shouldn't, but I definitely would. But legal services, people are reluctant to say, yeah, we really need that.
Yeah, the example I always give is, nobody really wants a lawyer. I mean, if they're coming to a lawyer, I mean, maybe if you're adopting a child or something, maybe you're like, yes, or you're buying a business, maybe. But, it's not like you're buying an iPhone and you get to open the box and play with it and all that. I mean, it's just, it's a lot harder to sell. That's for sure.
We're really more like dentists. We need them in our lives to keep us healthy and clean our teeth and give us a nice smile and not have pain. But who loves to go to the dentist? You'd have to be in love with your dentist to want to go to the dentist. So we're kind of the same.
Yes. Oh, I've never even thought about it, but yes, you're right. We are. And if your tooth is hurting or you got whatever, you got to go and you're not happy about it. Well, so I can't remember, maybe you didn't say it, but how many years ago now did you start your firm?
12 years.
12 years.
Make sure I'm getting it was the beginning of 2012. So we're in the 13th year.
Okay. So looking back, I guess all those ideas that you've had, we've talked about, the subscriptions and the training, you get to implement these ideas. But as you look back with sort of hindsight, is there anything that you wish you hadn't done, or maybe that you had done but sooner?
Having the ideas is good. I think with the ideas, it's important for them to be bullets rather than bombs. you put a little bit of resources into something and see if it works before you bet the whole firm on it. Mostly, I've done reasonably well at that. I've occasionally brought on people too soon before we really had quite enough cash flow to sustain them. And I've sometimes kept people a little longer than I should have. So I've learned to be really ruthless, where I've got to really be watching in that first 3 months. And if you don't have the chops for the job, we need to bless you and send you on your way. So that's been iterative for me. And I know I've learned a lot, but I don't want to say that I've got that down, because I think that is a skill that keeps being difficult. Yeah, so what have I learned, good and bad? I think the cash flow principles are important. The things that Atticus is teaching about handling your money well, making sure that you've got cash reserves built up, because you have good years and bad years, and we've had some of both, and it is in fact really important to have that money so you can keep payroll steady, keep bills paid. Mostly we've done well on that. Mostly. We were doing really well on it until my parents wanted to come out here and we bought them a house. So now we're kind of building up the cash reserves again.
Put them to work. Put them to work.
Well, they left, so now the house is an Airbnb, so at least it's generating a little bit of cash flow. But seriously, the business principles are really important, because if the business isn't run well, nobody's secure and happy. There's not a good foundation. I hired one of our amazing staff people, and the first check that she got, she came in and said, "Well, is it okay if I cash it?" And I'm like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't you cash it? And she said, "Would you need me to hang on to it for a few days?" And I realized she'd been in this environment where she wasn't getting paid.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Please cash the check. You're going to mess up my QuickBooks if you don't."
Yeah. Well, you bring up good points that I've experienced. I think any lawyer experienced, and it's there's this balance of not hiring soon enough versus hiring too soon. Where you maybe have gotten in front of your skis a little too much. And it's hard finding that balance. It really is. It's an art, not a science. Maybe if you get to the point where you got a highly sophisticated CFO on the team, they can tell you exactly when to do it. But then you got to pick the right person. You got the right person. So then you got, the lesson that everybody learns is, lawyers, I think, and I've heard this from many, many lawyers over and over and over, they tend to just keep people on way too long, and then they know they shouldn't be there. They don't want to deal with it. They feel bad. They're not, it's a nice person. All these things They tell themselves. But it's like you said, it's not good for the business. It's not good for everybody else. And, even if you've done it a few times, it's still a tough lesson to learn. I mean,
yeah.
So.
And then doing it right, not creating legal liability or other problems. My office manager goes to she's pretty involved with the Association of Legal Administrators. And some of the stories she comes back with about how some attorneys behave to their staff. So that's the opposite, right? There's the sweet conflict avoidant attorneys, and then there's the attorneys that are busy creating legal liabilities by mistreating people. So they need to be working with you, or maybe with me, on some of this stuff.
Well, that's you've got the employment background, so you should be good at it, right? Or at least you know what to do and what not to do. So.
Right, yeah.
That's good. So you've been at it 12 years. You got some good things cooking, got some good irons in the fire. As you look to the future, where do you want to see this thing going? Whether it's the training or the law firm or both?
Well, I'm at that point where I'm identifying what do I really like to do and where do I think I add the most value. And I think where I add the most value is high-level advising, investigations, especially the complicated ones, and the training. And there's a lot of day-to-day drafting and writing and so forth that I would really prefer not to do. So I'm trying to hand off as much as I can of that and looking forward. I would like to have other people doing that. And I'm old enough that, I could be thinking about retiring. I'm really not interested in retiring. I come from a pretty long-lived family and, I feel great. But I don't want to be working many hours either. So I would say over the next few years, I'd like to scale back enough so that, maybe I'm working 30 hours a week, maybe I'm working 25, but less of a grind. And we're coming now off of one of those tougher years, so starting to go in that direction, then it kind of backed itself up again. I'm trying to get back in that direction. But I enjoy what I'm doing if I'm not overwhelmed, so I don't want to stop doing it. But,
Well, it feels like, I don't know if you said it, but my sense is that this is sort of a calling for you. So, and you've sort of birthed a baby in the firm, and you want to maybe make sure that someone can take it and run with it, even when you're pulling back, right?
Right, and I want other people who have the same sense of passion to help people do well and solve problems. And, I've got a lot of other stuff I want to be doing too. I'm blessed with a handful of grandkids I want to be spending time with. We like to ski, we like to hike, we like to garden. So yeah, I don't want to be just like grind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the closest mountain that you go to? What's your...
Yeah, so we're about, is it Breckenridge that's the closest? Depending on traffic and so forth, we're like 2 to 3 hours away from the ski slope. So a lot of weekends we'll go up, ski, stay overnight, ski, come home again. It's sort of and I don't pay any attention to, we've got the Epic Pass, so it's 4 resorts. I let my husband pick the resort, where we're staying, the driving, because then I don't have to think about it, right? So I've got this outsourced.
You're so lucky. So lucky. I many years ago I spent a season out in Beaver Creek. And I've been out a couple times since, but not enough.
Well, hey, come visit. You can come stay with us, and we can go up together. If you're a mid-level skier, you can ski with me. If you're advanced, you ski with my husband.
Well, I do more of the snowboard now, and it's been so long that I would not call myself advanced at all. I don't fall, but I'm not going on the big time black diamonds or whatever. But, I've been trying to I want to get my kids out there, and they've at least, well, my son at least expressed some interest, but we just haven't been able to do it. So, but I just got to do it. So.
Well, it's worthwhile. It's really beautiful, and kids especially, they've got excellent ski lessons. They're pricey, but they're really good. So you drop your kid in an all-day ski lesson, and you'll come back, and they'll be going down the mountain.
That's perfect, yeah. Well, Theresa, this has been fun. I appreciate you coming on. I think you're doing some cool things, and you got an interesting practice. Again, you're the only person I know that does this. So if anybody out there wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
So telioslaw.com, Telios law.com. My email is tls@telioslaw.com. The training is at the teliosteaches.com website.
Well, cool. Well, Theresa, again, thank you.
Hey, thank you. It's been fun, and I would love to meet in person sometime. So you've got a standing invitation to come out and bring the family.
I got to go. We got to make it happen.
Yeah.
If you come to Atlanta, we'll do the same thing, but there's really not, other than stopping through the airport, there may not be a reason to come. I don't know. Not in the summer. It's hot.
Yeah, so, no, not in the summer. Come there and warm up in the middle of some winter, maybe.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, awesome. Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.